welcome to my garden, or to be more accurate, my grandmother's garden, much as she laid it out when she had the house built in 1932. Much of the design stays the same and lots of items have been reused. Now, for instance, the carvings either side of the front door, I think they were probably off the banisters at my great-grandmother's house in what is now Commercial Way. Granny wanted sunken gardens. Her sister in the Grove had a beautiful example, but Granny hadn't thought her design through, and the standard roses she planted in it got flooded and they died. There were originally 2 terracotta pots, but one got broken, and this one, the metal one, came from Councillor Westgate's house. He lived next to my grandmother in the Grove. Rumour has it that they were used by the Woking Council at the time of Queen Victoria's Jubilee. I've got no idea how right that is. Very first garden safari, we won a visit from a man from Kew, and he walked around the garden and gave advice and so forth, and I asked him about the rose growing up the front of the house to the right of the front door, because it was growing right up into the gutter and only flowering at the top, and he told me to prune it radically, which I did, and it has gone on flowering beautifully. And that was planted by my grandmother, and she died in 1967, and it was an old rose then, but it's still going strong. Notice the entwined ivy. It was taking a lot of sunlight from the flower bed beneath, so I got rid of it, but I kept the dead stems, and I think it's rather effective. Come on through the backyard to the back garden. I apologise if you're over 5'4". I am not, but I happen to like arches and tunnels, so mind your head. The Virginia creeper does rather attractive loops and grows all along here, and the flower bed here is used for things I don't know what they're going to be. I find them growing in the garden, I stick them in, leave them till they've done something and I know where to put them. The pier table came from my husband's side of the family, from an old house in Ireland. Note the use of the old watering cans, broken down of course, and the old Belfast sink, which is useful for standing pots in, and this is my potting area. We use an old gas pipe to keep the door open, and of course boots and gloves for putting plants in. The ironwork of this bench is pretty old. I've got a photograph of my grandmother sitting on it at her mother's house in Commercial Way, with the beginnings of Christchurch in the background. This I'm sure you would recognise as an upside down standard lamp, and I just thought it was rather nice to put some more root of ivy round it. I don't know, just looks nice. Saucepan rack with saucepans. And there is an old flower pot making sure that the water from the downpipe goes into the water butt. Finish. The sundial on the Birdbath was given to me by the last owners of Greylands House, later demolished and the flats built there. I showed it to Antiques Roadshow, but they doubted the date. The 1600 and something looks a bit scratched on, and the rest of the engraving looks pretty good. The arbour was built for me by my son-in-law out of old pallets thrown away and fencing thrown out, and even this lovely swing was thrown out by some neighbours. It's gone through various existences, in that originally it was quite small and just a couple of chairs around this little table, which is in fact an upturned, broken bird bath. Along the side beds, the tall plants at the back are held into position by wire. Some of it is actually old fairy-light wire with the bulbs removed. Twisted wire is very useful because you can twist the plants into it, and soon I hope you will only see the ivy and no wire at all, and it just keeps the plants in place. This is my version of Prince Charles's high growth stumpery. It's not quite up to his standard. I happen to like ferns, as did Granny, and it's where I put any rotting wood, so the insects love it. And I do actually have a stump, and all sorts of things live here, like the gnomes. The pond was dug out by my father in 1934. It's not the way you'd build a pond now, because it doesn't look natural. Anyway, eventually the oak tree roots came through, broke up the concrete, and for some time I used it as a fire pit. Then we put in various sorts of plastic. That never lasted long. Eventually we put in a butyl lining, and we've had that in for quite a long time now. And we have a hippopotamus, which was thrown out of the Hampton Court Flower Show. He's not the colour of a hippopotamus normally, but then I think the weather conditions are different here than they are. Did you get that picture of the fish?
I did.
Oh, good. Right, sorry. Right. I think it's because he should be living in Africa, and the sun is different there, so pigmentation is different. We now have a fountain and a waterfall. This clematis growing up the washing line post is a good example of the use of cut up tights just around it until it makes up its mind to climb all by itself. Many plants in this garden have been thrown out. Oh, some of them have been gifted to me, but that yucca had been thrown out on the common, and it was doing very well until the big storm of '87, when it blew over and part of it went into the pond, which was dry at the time. However, when we put water in the pond, I supported the bit in the pond on a breeze block, but it goes on flowering, even as part of it is in the water. Obviously it's a desert plant, but obviously it hasn't read the book. The shelter was always damp, even when we used it during the war, and yes, we did sleep down there sometimes. It's now flooded, and I try to get it emptied out in time for the garden safari. A few years back, some children from Hobridge School came to look at it because they were doing World War II, and my son-in-law cobbled together something that looked like the old bunks we'd had down there, and here are some pictures of what it was looking like when those kids came round. If you look along this little path, there is an old door to which is attached a mirror, which gives the impression that you're looking through a gate into another part of the garden. Number 46 means nothing. It was chucked out at Squire's. The mirror window was retrieved from a skip, of course. Hopefully, next year you can join me for a proper tour of the garden and a proper cup of tea, and I can show you this book which is all about this house and this garden. Thank you.